Cool, so welcome to Pricing for the Web / long title, How to Do Great Work Without Losing Your Shirt and Soul. It's a play on a book if you guys have ever read it, which is why that's long. My name is BradWeaver. You can find me when you're allowed to have devices at @BradWeaver on Twitter. I am from Atlanta, and I am the Director of Design at 9 Labs. We're a digital strategy firm in Atlanta. My day-to-day is user experience, information architecture, and so on. And I've been doing this for, I think, 17 years at this point, and been in business decision-making roles for 9. So that is my credibility to tell you about this stuff. Internal, external budgets, so both of those things. So I come from both perspectives, so hopefully whether you're in-house or solo practice or a small agency or whatever it is, you'll get something out of this talk. I like to participate with my audience, so the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, because you're in the South, and because I'd introduce myself, is if you would introduce yourself to the person next to you. It's important for later. Just tell them your name. All right, cool. Thank you, guys. Awesome. See, this is what it does. It goes haywire every time. Cool, so thank you guys for doing that. The reason we do that is we're going to talk about some things that are a little more deep than some talks. There's a lot of personal information in this talk, not personal as far as TMI stuff, but I love to talk about real numbers, because one of the things that frustrates me about a lot of talks is that they're platitudes. They're very abstract, and I like to talk about real numbers and real things, so I like to know the people in the room. I can't meet every one of you right now, so you can at least meet each other, and by 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, we know each other. So let's be honest. The money conversation is uncomfortable. Right? It's not a conversation anyone likes to have in any environment, whether it's in marriage or relationship, whether it's with parents and kids, certainly in the work environment if you're responsible for business development. It's the part of the job that most people hate. So it's also something that people don't talk about a lot. And I think the reason for that is this quote sums it up really well, is that money taps into our deepest emotions and symbolizes what we fear, hope for, and desire in life. How we spend our money defines us. There's a lot of philosophers in different times and eras and religions and so on that share that same ideology, that how you operate, why you seek what you do, and how you spend your money is a lot of what defines you. So it's a bit of a taboo subject, and so we're, especially in our Western civilization, we're a little bit more passive aggressive. It's a difficult thing for us to talk about early on in the process. So I want you guys to get past that. That's the first thing in this talk, because when you talk about money, it doesn't make you this guy, right? And that's what we envision. We think of the Wall Street banker, we think of this type of person. When you talk about money up front, it makes you a professional. And the Webster's Dictionary definition of professional is, it's a person who engages in a specific activity as one's main paid occupation rather than a pastime. And I love that definition, because I don't know how many of you guys tell people, especially if you're a web designer, which is where I started and moving into user experience, but I still tell my grandmother I'm a web designer because UX and IA makes no sense. That's cute, right? That's a hobby. Oh, that's cool. Can you do a website for me? They have no idea what a lot of people do when we do this for a living. But at least for me, your friends think that too. A lot of times it's like, oh man, throw me up a website. They have no idea that this is my job, that I wouldn't go to somebody else and ask them to do that in any other profession where it's a commodity. And you've got to operate with that attitude, whether you're a single person operating out of your spare bedroom in your house, or whether you're operating a 100-person agency, or somewhere in between, that you've got to come at this from the attitude that you're a professional. And it shocks me at the people who don't. But when you do this, what it means is it means you have self-worth. And a lot of creative types are introverts, or they're extroverts who are actually introverts. So self-worth is a big issue, I think, a lot of times. And you have to tell yourself that, I'm valued and what I do matters, and it's worth the money that I'm asking a person to give me. So enough of the touchy-feely with that, but I like to get that out of the way. So clients want to talk about money. I don't know if any of you guys know this, but they do want to have this conversation. They don't want to just start working and at some point figure out how to pay you, because they have responsibilities as well. They've got a number in their head. They do, whether they tell you they don't. They know how much is too much at the least, and they probably know how much is too little. In addition to that, that most of us, unless we're dealing with small businesses, are tending to deal with people that report to somebody for the money that they spend. So they've been given a directive on what that number is, and putting that conversation off till later, it's a huge mistake. And it's over and over again, I see that in the project life cycle, that it's a conversation that happens right before the contract gets sent or right before the proposal gets sent. And the truth is that clients don't do this every day. So you can't expect them to know this, just how this works. Some of us may be fortunate to work with a company that hires outside design all the time, or we're in-house and we're, just our boss just asks us how many hours, maybe we use an agile process. It's still the same conversation because hours are money. And those people still, even in an internal environment, they don't necessarily know how long it takes you to build out a certain application if that's not what they do. If it's a traffic manager, she's not going to understand how long it takes to build an application, so it's still money. And you need to have those conversations up front rather than just starting work. I think that what it creates is this, we run to this place where we want, how many people want to, you want to work on products, you want to go work in VC, you want to go work where there's no money conversation, you can just do whatever you want, and everybody plays Xbox, till 3 in the afternoon. We run away from that. That's not the environment that I get excited about, and I don't think that's the kind of people that are changing the world. I don't think it's the kind of people that are using design for good, that try to live in this environment where they avoid talking to clients and colleagues about what it costs to do something. Because the truth is we can educate clients. I know you've all had that, well, how much do you think this should cost? $500, type calls. And those are really, they're frustrating, but at the same time, clients, they do this. They always have this face. I love the Mark Wahlberg face. It's one of my favorite things. They always look puzzled, but they never ask questions when you tell them a price. They're always like, well, why is it, this? Why is it that? So I think the question that gets asked all the time is, how much is this project going to cost, right? And is that a fair assumption? The better question, and kind of the core of what I'm getting at here, is what you have to start operating on is how much do you charge? And it's not semantics. It's really important to understand the difference in this, because price for something and how much you charge are two very different things, because a price is a commodity. I exchange an amount of money for a thing, a widget. We don't make widgets. We're a service-based business. So charging, similar to professional service, a lawyer, someone like that's you will not see a lawyer give you a quote based on how long they think it's going to take something. They might tell you that, but they're going to need a retainer or something like that. I don't want to compare ourselves to lawyers, but it's frustrating that clients expect us to be able to give them a fixed cost and be able to just tie that cost to things that we just pull out of thin air. So there's got to be a process behind it. And that's what we're going to dig into. There's a formula to get here, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but I was excited about the fact when I first learned this, that there was a formula. That there's a way to get here that makes a lot of sense and works most of the time. It's very simple. It's hours divided by expenses plus profit equals rate. Whether you operate on hourly or not, you have to do this in order to price projects successfully. We'll break that down a little bit. So hours is the amount of time you're available for billable work. I want to stress that's billable work. That's not 40 hours a week. That's not 60 hours a week like most of us actually work. That's time you're available for billable work. And a general consensus based on a few authors that have looked at this is about 100 hours for most creatives and front-end developers. So that means about 25 hours a week is the ceiling for how much time you can really run a clock in your time tracking app and bill a client for that. You certainly can have weeks where you get in 40 hours of work if you're willing to pull overtime, but that's not doing great work without losing your soul, right? Because that's just a grind that's not sustainable for the long term. Your expenses is your total business cost. If you own a solo shop, this is everything it costs for you to live and operate. This is what you need to make, what you need to have computers and software and services and pay legal fees and accounting fees and all of that stuff, everything. And if you don't know what this number is, that's a really scary way to operate as well. And if you are in-house, you need to know what your expenses are for your team. You've got a budget somewhere, and if you don't, God help you, probably need to get a different job. Because if your manager doesn't have your department budgeted for what you're going to do, that's not a way for a business to be successful. So they know that based on what's coming in, that this amount is available for this time period, this project, or whatever else. The one that everybody misses is profit. Some of us that aren't necessarily in the decision-making role don't focus on this as much, but looking at a project and saying it's going to cost $10,000 and then giving a client for a quote for $10,000 is mistake number one. That's the absolute worst mistake you can make, because what happens when things go wrong? What happens when you misunderstood or underestimated things? And also, what happens when you're just taking hours in to put hours back out? You might as well get a job somewhere. So if you want to grow and you want to be profitable, you got to bill in profit. 10 to 20% is a good general rule. 20 is the number we tend to put in. And then rate is your hourly rate you use to calculate project cost. This is different than if you do subcontract work and you tell somebody you're $75 an hour or whatever else. This number might be different, and that's okay. This is an internal number that you have to know, so that you can go through the process of figuring out how much a project is going to cost to build and what the best way is to come back to the client and give them feedback. There's a tool, and these slides will obviously be shared, but instacalc.com has a tool. It's a crazy URL, but that's the only URL you can get where you can actually do this. Somebody built a calculator that has kind of an hourly rate calculator in it that's really similar, and it has a bunch of other stuff, but I recommend it. It's a good way to do it in case you can't do that math on Excel. So you have the secret formula, you know how all this works, and at this point you know how it works, so you just run like hell. You just go and you're just like, hey, I know how to do this now, I'm gonna operate, and I know what the number is, I can quote on my projects. Well, obviously not so fast, because the core of all of this is value. I don't know if you guys have heard of value-based pricing. That's a lot of what we're gonna talk about, because this is how you get to a place where you actually like what you do, I think. The first rule for value-based pricing, which is why I had you guys introduce each other, is this right here. There is this great collaboration and community aspect to our industry when it comes to everything but money. People will openly talk about the tools that they use and how they did it and open source their software and do all these things. But if you start asking some people, like, what did you guys charge for that project? What did you guys bid? It's weird. People really start to kind of be like, that's not a cool conversation. You've got to find people that you can have this conversation with in your own market that you compete with, like I have, or just people that you're friends with that you meet at conferences like this. Like, what are you guys charging for projects like that? I mean, it could be a very specific question, like, we're building a WordPress marketing website that involves these 2 or 3 things. What would you guys charge for that? Having those conversations really helps you understand the value, because those people are your peers. So it lets you know a level that you're on, that what those people are doing. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to define your market. There's 2 of these. There's vertical, and marketing 101 stuff. Your vertical market is who you work with, healthcare, industrial, so on. And the horizontal market is what you do, user experience design, front-end development, and so on. And that can get pretty wide. But a vertical market, some marketing experts will tell you you need to pick a vertical and stick with it. Like, we only do web development for healthcare or something like that. That's fine if you want to do that. The reason you need to understand some semblance of a market is the type of people you're going to work with. So a vertical can be small business, and you need to understand that with small business, $5,000 websites are pretty common. Versus, we do dashboards for healthcare. That tends to be a longer sales cycle, and projects tend to be 6 figures. You want to start to try to edge towards having an idea. If it's just we do everything for everybody, it's kind of hard to do this. The other thing about defining your market is where you work. I live and work in Atlanta, and we operate with a lot of people in New York, and I work in New York a lot as well. And these are not made-up numbers. This is based on Robert Half Group and a couple of other groups, kind of a conglomerate of their numbers, where they do market research every year on average salaries. So if you were to take a baseline salary of $100,000 for a particular role, in Atlanta, that exact same job, the exact same skill set should be $105,000. In New York City, it should be $140,000. That's cost of living increase, and just demand, and so on and so forth. With this business, you tend to operate with people who are not necessarily in your geographic area. For us, we quote everything on New York rates, because we just don't want to have mixed rates for different people. We operate with some clients in New York, some we don't. But in general, you at least have to do this. There are some people here, like Charlotte is a pretty flat market. It's 105. But close by to here, like Greenville's a 95, it's actually less. You shouldn't price less, but you should be prepared that if you quote and you're quoting against other firms in that small town, you might get undercut on price, and you just need to know going into it that we may not be able to get some of those same prices. So we've got to find talent and so on that allows us, to also have a lower salary to make those numbers. Experience matters, and I'm going to run through really quick some numbers to illustrate this. These are again from Robert Half and Creative Group and a couple other organizations. This is the window that an average salary should be. So if you look at yourself, depending on how your income comes in, what your income should be, it's a pretty wide window. And for user experience designers, 75 to 102 or 120K. There's a lot of things that factor into that, experience being the biggest one, but also market and so on. A senior web designer, 77 to 107, junior, 53 to 80, which when I saw that number the first time, I was like, are you kidding me? Because we have a lot of junior web designers that are coming in at 35,000 that have 4 or 5 years of experience. So I'm like, where are they starting them all out at 53? Agencies drive up those rates to a degree, but it's also, we're factoring in freelancers, because a lot of people are a junior web designer, but they're freelancer, but they're charging $100 an hour. There's a lot of difference there. Front-end developers, 65 to 90K, and then what I just standard stack developer, 72 to 102, which I think is astronomically low. So if you're a developer in the room, please listen to this talk, because developers need to get their rates up. I'm shocked at the developers that are willing to do some of the work they do for us for $75 an hour. For what it's worth, especially what it's worth to clients, because some of it ends up being intellectual property. Regardless of what it is, based on these numbers, and based on that formula, you need to find what your rate is. So a good way to do it is for you to sit down and say, from a lifestyle perspective, this is what I want to make, this is how I want to live, this is what my mortgage is, and all those other things, and work backward from that number. I've had a lot of people do that rather than that big expense number. And that helps you figure out what your rate is. So if it's $100,000, you decide it's $100,000, which is, let's say 120, it's really easy, which is $10,000 a month. I divide that by 100 hours, then it's $100 an hour. It's a really easy way to calculate what I should be charging per hour for hours I can work, not every hour of every day, because there's administrative and all that other stuff. So I believe that sharing is caring. And so I tell people very openly, we don't publish to our clients because it's none of their business what our internal rate is. If they're on an hourly project with us, then we tell them what that hourly project's rate is. But what I charge, what I used to operate, is $150 to $200 an hour. And that is not high for what we do. And when you factor in all of the stuff it takes to get me to that $100 hour to do the work, it's a steal for a lot of our clients because of the experience that we have and what we give them. And I remember the first client that I ever charged $60 an hour when I was first starting out. I thought I was like, robbing a bank when I charged somebody that per hour. It was just, I can't believe that I'm charging, because in my head, at that point, $20 an hour was a really good job, especially for people who draw pictures all day, So when you got to that point, when I started realizing, that this client's willing to pay me 60, but this client over here is willing to pay me 80, and I can do less for them but make the same money, you grow from there. But that experience that you build, that time that you spend, it gets you to a point where you've got to be confident when you turn this over, to people that you say, if someone has to know for whatever calculation, working with an agency, something like that, what do you guys charge? This, I don't bat an eye when I share this number, and you shouldn't either. If you've been doing this for a while, or even if you haven't and you're good, you're worth it. And that's the whole point. The first part of the talk is you've got to operate that way. You've got to believe in that. But I get this response from people, I tell them my hourly rate. They're like, I can't believe you charge that much per hour. And the truth is that someone's always going to be cheaper. Someone will always be cheaper than you. Somebody's going to come in and undercut you. You quote $10,000, they're going to quote $97.50. It's going to happen. It's going to happen every time. You can choose to compete on price, but I believe that it's better to compete on quality. But a lot of that comes to how you interact with a client, because we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, about the response process when people ask you for how much something's going to cost that helps you avoid this. But the truth is that if you're getting every project that you quote, you're doing it wrong. And I hate to say that because it sounds condescending, but the fact is that if you're sending in quotes and the clients are going, okay, you just left money on the table. I can promise you, almost every time. If there's not a little bit of pushback from a client, in most scenarios, you've probably underpriced what they thought it was going to be. It's the client's job. Mike Montero has this quote, it's the client's job to get the most work out of you for the least amount of money. And that's business, right? I mean, when you go to buy anything else, it's your job to get something you can for the cheapest price possible. I mean, we don't just go, well, whatever it costs, I'll take it. That's not how most of us operate. So for us, I feel pretty successful. Like a good number for us is about 3 out of 10 quotes that we get back. And that we're doing really well if we get 3 out of 10. 5 out of 10, I'm like, maybe we're doing something wrong here. If we're getting 7 or 8 out of 10 back, it's time to raise rates, or it's time to start looking at, we're not vetting these clients properly or something like that. All of this stuff about money, let's talk about quality, because the whole purpose of this talk is to get you to a place to where you can do this, but also do great work and price. The question is, does it matter? Does quality matter? For a lot of us, is this just a job? And for you, it may be, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I love this quote, just mentioned Mike Montero, you're responsible for the work you put into the world. It's a quote that stings because I don't know about you guys, but I look at work that I did even 6 weeks ago, and now I look at it again, and it's crap. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe people know that I did that. It's terrible. It still happens. I'm not perfect by any means, but if you guys haven't read Design as a Job by Mike, who's doing the closing keynote today, my God, it's the best $10 you'll ever spend on a book. But I think what's important to understand about quality is that when you have a controlled pricing system, it gives you creative freedom. So when you know how much money is coming in, and when you know how much things should cost, you have the flexibility to be able to look at a project and go, I can try that in a new programming language, or I can spend 3 or 4 more hours and do that as SVGs instead of PNGs and do it right and future-proof it, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. But the key things that I think come out of a controlled pricing strategy and having an idea of what everything should cost is a higher quality, ability to do side projects. I think it's really important to do side projects, whether, like I'm in a small team, we have side projects, we do. It keeps you sane. If you're a solo person, if you're constantly doing client work, it's really hard to grow creatively unless you've got enough budget to do things with new technology or whatever. It's just a good outlet. Pro bono work, I'm passionate about doing pro bono work, but we can only do so much because our time is money. But the more controlled our pricing strategy is, the more we can help causes that we believe in. And learning. This is the one that has killed me in the past, is I don't have time to learn new things, and you get behind really quick. So the more that I'm charging properly and knowing going into a project that there's some pad here, we're doing a project right now where we've been building out a new development workflow, and I don't know how to use Gulp. I didn't know how to, I was a grunt person for my, kind of task management, and I moved into that, and was able to put in 4 or 5 hours to do that because we knew the client was using it. It was going to benefit them. So there was a reason to just build some pad into that, but also just for yourself so that you can learn a new skill. When I switched from Photoshop to Sketch, that was getting clients to a point to where I could have enough budget to learn SVGs and so on. And most importantly, doing what you love and loving what you do. So the key to all that is just avoid emotional pricing. We're emotional people, we're creative people, but at the end of the day, your gut is not a calculator. It's not. And you've got to come from a place of having some hard numbers behind how you price projects so that you can do good work and make money. All right, so enough of the emotional stuff. Let's talk about some core practices, and then I'm going to go into the pricing models with some really specific stuff. Your hands are going to hurt, frantic notes, and all that. So these are the rules, the house rules that I think in order to be successful with this, you've got to do. Number 1, cardinal rules: track your time. It's the biggest mistake most people make starting out. They just, I'll track it later. If you don't know how long you spent on something, you don't know how much money you made. You don't know how much it costs. It's so difficult to teach ourselves to do this, but once we do, it's easy. There's so many apps that do it. You have to track your time or this won't work. Log communications. If clients are sending you 14 chain emails of all the stuff that make this change, makes that change, and you don't have an idea of where things went wrong, that's really difficult as well. Basecamp, 10,000 feet, that's what we use. A combination of the two, Flow, Asana, Trello, whatever you use. You've got to have something where you've got a permanent record of your interaction with your clients and when files get sent and when changes get made. Also, so you can charge them for change orders. So you've got documentation. You sent me this and you said you want it changed to this, and we have to charge you for that. So the more you have that and it's not just an email, the better off you are. Get a contract. I could do a whole talk on this. Please, no matter what, if it's a $200 email newsletter thing for a friend's nonprofit, you still need a contract. There's so many things that can go wrong if you don't. Define the scope of work in writing. Spell out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and when you're going to do it. If you don't do that and you just kind of say, we're going to deliver this thing, then you're going to have scope creep. The client's going to ask for things that they're not willing to pay for because they have an expectation in their head of what they're going to get, and you have an expectation in your head of the work you're going to do. And if those aren't written down, it's a recipe for disaster. Invoice on time. This is huge. If you send your clients, if it's a big enough client, if there's one person you send a Christmas gift to, the accounts payable person is who I would do that with, seriously, because they can be your lifeline. 30-day net terms are flexible. 90-day net terms are flexible. And in addition to that, they're flexible in the wrong direction. It can be 30-day net and they just forgot to pay your invoice because they don't know who you are or whatever else. So invoice when you said you're going to invoice, and be in touch with that accounts payable person so that you can say, hey, this is due in 15 days and so on. Because if you don't follow those procedures, you've lost all credibility to hold them accountable for that. Set boundaries. Publish hours. Put your hours in your contract or master services agreement. That this timeline does not include weekends. It does not mean that we are going to answer your email at 11 o'clock at night, in addition to the fact that you say we're only going to go this far as an internal conversation. We realize we want it to be the greatest design in the world, but we're only going to go so far because we only have so much money. Do postmortems. Build it into the project cost. If you can build in just maybe 4 hours, a half day, maybe on a Monday or a Friday even, right after a project finishes, as soon as you're done, do a postmortem of the project and explore what went wrong, what went well, which is going back to the communications and the time tracking. Where did we screw up? We spent too much time on X, or we should have sent them this mock-up sooner. You'll start getting that data that helps you, especially from UX and IA, from our perspective. The prototype early and often mentality, we got better at it when we started doing postmortems because we realized, we should have shown them that here because these changes that ended up costing this much would not have occurred if we had, done this prototype. So we spent more money, we started spending more money on prototyping and more interactive prototyping because we learned from our postmortems.
Do you keep your postmortems internal, or is it something you would involve the client?
We try to involve the client if we can, or both. Yeah, try to involve both, because we do survey our clients what went well, and I ask for 3 referrals every time. I don't always get them. And the last one's manage your money. I'm not going to be a mom here on that, but if you don't, the whole feast or famine mentality. Elise Bennon has a book called The Creative Freelancer's Guide to Money. It's in the resources slide. She talks a lot about this. You get $20,000 in checks one month and no checks for 3 months. That's how a lot of us live. You got to learn to live like that if you're not going to be stressed out and taking crappy work just to make rent. You've got to get to a point where you understand this is the means that I can live within based on what I'm charging right now. This is how much I have to live, and to be able to sit on the rest and not go buy something is really difficult, but you have to learn to do that if you're going to operate, especially a small shop. So let's dig into the question that people ask you, which is how much is a website? Can you give me a ballpark? How much is a website? How much, oh my God, it's like, is the sky blue? I tell people, first off, there's different approaches. There's 2 ways to do it. This is one of my top 5 gifts right now. I love this gift. It takes a second, but you get it. Yeah. There's 5 pricing models that I think this is pretty comprehensive. I don't think that there's a 6th, and if there is, we'll find out about it later. The first one is value and project-based pricing. So project-based pricing is what most of us do. How much is a website? It's $10,000, $5,000 now, $5,000 later, get the work. Yeah. Pretty simple stuff, and that's not a bad way to operate. It's just boring. But flat project pricing is fixed cost. It's usually tied to deliverables, and it's 50-50, 25% increments, whatever. The pros to it, well, obviously clients like this the best because it's a controlled cost for them. So you tell them how much something's going to be, and then there you go. The problem with it and the cons is that it makes what you do a commodity. And if you're in commodity websites, that's fine, but I'm not. So it's kind of hard to do commodity stuff. It's very common, it's predictable. It's predictable for you too. You can say, I know I'm going to get this much money on this date, so there's pros to it. And opportunity for profit is high. You can make a lot of profit on flat project pricing if you get good at what you do. The downside to it is I think most people undercharge because they don't ask all the questions up front that need to be asked. They just want to get the next project. There's the risk of going over budget and losing money. My company, we just had a project that we did flat pricing on. I thought it was dumb at the time, but we did it anyway. We went over budget by $13,000. Yeah. So I do still make these mistakes, definitely. Even I need to, eat my own cooking when it comes to some of this stuff. But we were in a rush to get this client off the ground, and we said, well, let's do a flat price on this one. It was a huge mistake. And this was this year. This was in February of this year. And it's tough to cover unexpected challenges. Some average costs for most people is about $5,000 to $15,000 for a marketing website for most small businesses. If you're, a decent sized agency, like for us, marketing websites, 20 to 40, that tends to be with a bigger brand. And then for a dynamic site, maybe it's got a little bit of interactivity and commerce, usually 15 to 30,000. And then it really just all depends on the business demand. So those are I've found that those are pretty general market rates. It's about 5,000 as a basement. There are plenty of people that are below that. But to me, if that's your business model, please don't take this the wrong way. But if your business model is $5,000 websites, your Squarespace is putting you out of business within the next year, probably. So you either need to move up or move on because it's not going to be sustainable for very long. Clients are getting really smart about that. How to calculate a flat price project? Your rate times how long you think it will take. That's the formula. That's how most of us do it. How much we charge per hour. Hopefully you've used the formula to get a real per hour rate, and then how long you think it's going to take. The problem is that you're guessing how long you think it's going to take because there's not enough money to really explore what it's going to take to get there. So let's talk about value-based pricing. What's the difference between value and flat project pricing is value pricing depends on the client, and the first rule of value-based pricing is charge bigger clients more. That is not dishonest. It is based on the value that it has to the client. A marketing website that is $20,000 worth of development for a mom and pop feed and seed store versus a marketing website for a company that's going to sell $30 million worth of products off the same website is worth more money. It is your right and responsibility to get paid more to build that because of the value it is to the client. Some people may not agree with that, which is why this is a controversial topic. That's fine, but I'm going to cash the checks where I agree with it because it's a better way to operate. Because the expertise, the things that we've been doing for years on end, it's not fair for all of the work that I've done all of these years that I can in 2 hours tell you how to fix something that a year ago it would have taken me 20, that this guy gets it for 2 hours worth of work and that guy paid 20, right? It's not right. It's not fair. You shouldn't operate your business like that. And you have to get your head around this idea for value-based pricing to work, is that it doesn't just mean that we're just going to, for us, Coca-Cola is one of our clients, we're just going to charge Coke more because they have more money. That's the wrong way to approach it. The right way to approach it is we know what's going to come out of this and what the value is to the client, and we have these conversations up front with them. We should be compensated for our expertise, for what we're doing and how we operate with them. Because the client is paying you for solutions, not the time that it took to get there. That is what they're hiring you for, is a solution, not how you got there. For the most part, they don't care. They don't know the difference between PHP and Jekyll. They might care about a CMS or whatever else, but they don't care. They're paying you for the solution. The easiest way to get started with value-based pricing is ask for a budget. The first time I ever asked a really big client, like, how much do you think this is going to cost? And they said, well, we're thinking, between $75,000 and $100,000. And I was, because we were thinking, I'm serious, $8,000 to $10,000 for this work. And it really did end up being about $15,000 worth of work. That was fine. We took the project, we did the project, and that was the first time I'd ever ran into that, where the client was thrilled with the work. They're a repeat client. We still have them because they do that stuff. They answer those questions when you ask, and you just have to ask. And if they say they don't know, we'll get into that in a second. The one thing about this type of pricing is don't make this mistake. Don't tie your payments to your deliverables. That's the only thing about flat project pricing that I think most people don't know. If you tie it to 50% of the project, 50% of the cost when the project's done, then you may be chasing that money down for a year, right? Because how many projects do you guys finish on time? We never finish projects on time if we're depending on the client for content. They sit on it for 9 months sometimes. You tie it to time. that at 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, whatever it is, depending on the size of the project, or every 30 days or whatever it is, that's when we get our money. Now you've got to uphold your end of the deal, and you've got to deliver what you can deliver within the agreements. You've got to do your best. It's not going to work every time. Some clients aren't going to agree to it, but when you can, tie your deliverables to time, or tie your money to time, not deliverables. It's a lot less stressful way to operate your business. Hourly pricing, just you charge per hour. The pros to it is, you get paid what you work. There's no risk for going over or under. There's, it's easy to say no to changes. You can look at a client and say, yeah, we can do that, but it's going to be 10 more hours. So, as a creative, that's kind of nice when they try to wedge stuff in. But the thing about hourly is there's really no room for profit unless you're subcontracting. So if you're charging somebody $150 an hour and you're paying someone to do the work, $75 an hour, that's really the only way to be profitable hourly. In addition, for the fact it commoditizes what you do, it's very transactional. There's not really a great way to build a client relationship. You really just feel like an employee. I'm not saying hourly is bad. I'm saying it's complicated and it can get messy because you have to go back to the client a lot to ask for approvals, and you're not really able to really flex your muscles and do good creative work within an hourly model. Retainer pricing, there's two kinds. There's time-based retainers, which is just you give us, we're $100 an hour, and you buy 100 hours from us, so that's $10,000, and you just write us a check for $10,000 at the first of every month. It's pretty simple. It's the ad agency kind of model, and it's fine to operate that way. There's some people that do use it or lose it, where it's you buy 100 hours a month. If we only work 20, then you lost 80. And there's some people that do it where you buy 100 and they only use 70, and you roll the 30 over. That can get really messy to do that, because all of a sudden you have a 300-hour deficit for your client. You can, if you want to do that, if the client, you can say we'll only roll up over so many hours, 50 hours or something. It's good because you can control costs, you can get a little bit more flexible, but the roll up is the biggest con for me on that one. A value-based retainer, which is what we try to do. We don't always get them, but what that is my favorite. Because what you do with a value-based retainer is you tell a client, we're going to work with you, and we're going to do these things, and we're going to do them all the time. We're going to collaborate, and you pay us $10,000 a month. It doesn't matter what you deliver or when you deliver it or whatever else it is. You are just in a relationship with that client. They've engaged you. This is the Mad Men ad agency mentality applied to digital. And clients are doing this more and more now, where they're like, we need you as an expert, we need your help, we need you to support us, so we'll pay you to do that. The last one is package pricing. Well, the last one that most people would do. And package pricing is basically just, sometimes you can post it publicly on your website. It's $1,500 for a logo and a website. There's people who do that. There's some pros to that, especially if you're really starting out. There's even some pros to that on a higher level. Like, if you're working with like a big client, you can say for $50,000, we'll come in and do all of these things. And maybe you don't put it on your website, but you just have a fixed, rate that you'll like. It doesn't matter how long it takes us to do it. Sometimes it takes us 10,000 worth of work, sometimes 60, it works out. The downside to it is that, again, it kind of commoditizes things. It's not really sustainable long-term, and it's kind of hard to get out of that churn of, so on and so forth. Investment pricing, we don't have any clients like this. Some of you guys may, which is like, we'll give you, 10% of the company for, if you go do these things for us or whatever. I think this quote sums it up. Just beware of clients who want you to work for equity or other things that can't be easily converted into rent. I'm not telling you not to do it. I just don't do it. But if the opportunity comes along, it's fine. But anyway, the last bit's RFPs and discovery. When people send you a request for proposal, what we recommend is that you respond with a contract, not a proposal. I don't know, how many of you guys do discovery? Show of hands. Any of you? Okay, cool. I was like, God, please tell me you're doing discovery. So what we do with that is we don't respond to RFPs we don't go off and do a proposal in our hole for 3 weeks and then send it back to the client. We would respond like, we would love to work on your RFP. Here's a minimum engagement, a master services agreement for us to come in and work on that RFP for you. That does not have to be a massive company. That can be a $10,000 website. We do it all the time where we're like, for $2,500, we'll come meet with you for a day, come back with all these solutions, and then if it works, we've already done stuff we have to do anyway to build the project. So we send them a master services agreement, we set up a Basecamp project. It also makes it a lot easier to close the sale with a client if you're being bid against with other agencies, because they already feel like they're like, I guess we agreed to work with these guys because they're getting Basecamp emails and they've already signed an MSA and all that stuff. It's a good way to work. But I just tell people, Discovery is getting paid to provide a quote. And I get this look when I tell people that, like, get paid to provide quotes. And they're like, what do you mean? And it's, it's a great example. It's just like just taking all these little pieces and just looking deep into it. You can do Discovery where the spyglass is this long, and you do Discovery where the spyglass is this long, right? I mean, you can do different levels of Discovery, but the important thing is that you establish that community and that collaboration with the client very early on, because what that's going to do, going back through all these models, is it eliminates a lot of that pushback that you get early on when you come in at higher prices. And it also eliminates you being wrong about the price much more often. If you're able to, that client that quoted $75,000 to us and we thought it was going to be $10,000 worth of work, if we had done Discovery with them, which would have been to our detriment, we would have probably come back and said, it's about $20,000 worth of work. They would have been thrilled. Hopefully they would have hired us to do additional work since that budget was set aside, but it actually could have even saved the client money. But either way, we would have been more involved. So with all these pricing models, which is best? There is no one model that fits. So I like to look at it as what's the best in each situation. Flat value pricing works really well with strategy consulting, design, front end, template projects, one-off, all that kind of stuff. What most of the people at this conference probably do. So either one. Hourly, I think complex development. We do some complex development projects, and I think that those still kind of have to be hourly unless you can get a value-based retainer, because we just don't know how long something's going to take. Team contribution, so if you're working for an agency and they're just having you come in as, like, we call it like special ops, they're having us to come in and just do like a special ops mission for something, we do still do those hourly because we can't talk them into value for that. Repairs and maintenance, we do a few clients, we maintain their projects, we do that hourly for the most part because there's not anything to add in the small strategy and consulting. Time-based retainers is, the big one is actually the last one, which is content strategy. I think if you're a content strategist, you really kind of have to do time-based retainers because it's hard to sell a value-based retainer unless you're just really good or it's a really big client. But you can get a client to just say, we're going to write so many blog posts or so many things or whatever each month for that. And then a value-based retainer, which is our sweet spot, what we do, which is IA and UX, which I think for UX, because it's not that I want to do all these theoretical exercises, it's what I want to take the time to get it right, and really the value-based retainer allows us to do that. And package pricing, small business, theme, template, and it's good if you're just starting out. I'll share with you guys, there's how these slides get posted, there's all these resources. Unless you have hands of fury, you can't write all this down. But there's a GitHub project I'll show you in a sec that has all this listed, but these are just some books that I recommend and where a lot of this information comes from. I'm currently writing a book for Focal Press that'll be out around this time next year, but I'm going to be soliciting feedback and building a website soon. So if you want to connect with me on Twitter, they've contracted me to turn this talk and a couple other talks that I do on client relations into a book. We have no idea what it's going to be called yet, but we're writing it. These are some great websites. The 99 and Freelancers Union are the two that if you don't have them bookmarked, even if you're not a freelancer, there's a lot of stuff about this stuff for client relations. Go to Creative Mornings Talks. You'll have these conversations with people. Some software, these are just different ones that we use that you guys can learn about. And then if you want to hire a coach, I don't know any of these people. Well, I know Ed personally, but recommend all these people. They're really good, and I highly recommend that you talk to someone about doing that. You can connect with the project there. It's just my name and pricing for the web on GitHub. And I have all of these resources and a bunch of other stuff that you can do, and I'm constantly adding to it. It'll be updated next week. And I'll leave you with this quote: "The value of $1 is social as it is created by society." Thanks.